quite have a quorum, so we'll backtrack to approve the minutes once we do, but we didn't want to keep people waiting on our exciting agenda today. We will move on to our first agenda item. The agenda item is a continuation of the conversation and testimony that we had at our last hearing on enforcement and compliance with the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. And we did have a couple of additional members of the public who signed up who wanted to share some thoughts. So we will first go to that additional testimony before we go to member discussion. And the first person on my list, it's Melissa Zimmerman and Matt Senat. Are you, and I believe they're online. And also just so everyone knows who's testifying, we have lots of good things to discuss, but an agenda that I'm not as worried about time as I was during the last hearing that I chaired, where I was like 2 minutes and I'll cut you off. Still stick to the point, but I'm not going to be like quite as fierce about our time limits today. So with that, I will turn it over to Melissa Zimmerman and Matt Senat.
Very good. Yes, thank you for the invite, first and foremost. Good morning, co-chairs and members of the commission. My name is Matt Senat. I'm here today on behalf of the East Side Corridor residents in Steele County, which is in Owatonna. And I'm here with Melissa Zimmerman, as previously stated. Just want to say we've been previously advocating for residents impacted by a high-speed highway in Owatonna that's been proposed now for about 3.5 years. Like many residents, we didn't initially understand the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act, but we've learned about it in October of 2024 when we submitted our first substantial data request on this project. Since then, we've been submitting, we've submitted roughly, I want to say 24 data requests across 4 or 5 different...
Excuse me, Mr. Senat, do you mind talking a little bit louder? We tried to see if we could turn up the volume on our end, and we can't, and we just want to make sure that we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me a little bit better now?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Okay. And do you need me to restart?
No, we also have it written out, so we were reading it along with you. But yeah, from now on, if you speak a little bit louder, it'll be good. Thanks.
You got it. No problem. So we learned about it in October of 2024 when we submitted our first substantial data request on the project. And since then, we've submitted roughly 24 data requests across 4 to 5 different government entities to obtain critical information that we needed to stay informed about the project. What we learned very quickly, however, was that the experience level varies dramatically depending upon the entity. And at the state level, requests sometimes took longer than expected, but we did receive communication, and that was the important part to start the process. And we did receive updates when we received copies of the data from those entities. When an entity is willing to comply, the process can work, obviously. Our struggles, however, arose when data was not being produced, and those challenges ultimately led us to file a formal data practices complaint, pro se, because our group did not have the resources to hire an attorney at that time. And we were also facing other potential legal costs with regard to this project and challenging the location. We substantially prevailed in our data practices complaint. The judge ordered a maximum civil penalty against the county, including compliance, but that ruling did not result in meaningful access to the data. And that's really why we're here today to talk about this. It's not new rights, but enforcement, timing, and access to remedies when the law isn't followed. And I'll turn it over to Melissa Zimmerman, and she'll explain what that failure looked like in practice. Melissa.
Thank you. My name is Melissa Zimmerman, as Matt said. We did substantially prevail in our data practices case, but the access didn't improve. It deteriorated. That deterioration became critical when the county opened the public comment period for the EAW for our East Side Corridor project, and we lost access to the data. We needed that data to submit meaningful comments to protect residents. The county stated more data was available, but we quickly learned that the software needed to review that data was removed, and the files they provided were converted to formats that we never requested and could not meaningfully access. We also discovered that the data previously reviewed was no longer available. Despite multiple requests, the county declined to extend or pause the comment period until the data access issues were resolved. That resulted in direct, real harm. The data that arrives after a decision window closes does not restore public participation. Despite prevailing in that hearing, the only enforcement option we have to take against the county is to take them back to district court to enforce the ruling. That's another $10,000. That's not accessible to most residents and community groups. We've now been waiting about 15 months for data. When we first filed requests, we believed they fell under a freedom of information style timeline, but we quickly learned that the Minnesota Data Practices doesn't offer a timeline like that. While not all requests can meet a rigid timeline, most can. Requests for public policies should not take 5 months to produce. New legislation now imposes a 5-day deadline for residents to view the data. This is unrealistic given how long residents wait for data production and busy lives. If there's a deadline for one side, there should be a realistic deadline for both sides. We were willing to work collaboratively on rolling production and prioritization, but production didn't occur until oversight became involved. And it happened quickly then. That tells us reasonable deadlines are achievable, even if it means breaking up data requests. A system with no deadline functions the same as producing no data at all. We were also faced with practical barriers to access. The county provided a dedicated laptop, but stripped it of basic software like Outlook, Word, PDF viewers, even though those were the formats of the data being provided. We asked either for access to the basic software or electronic data so that we could use our own licensed tools. We were told we could not have free data. Electronic data itself should be free. Electronic delivery should be an additional access option, not a substitute for inspection where inspection remains appropriate, as it shifts the licensing burden to residents instead of the government. This approach is already used successfully by many government entities. Finally, as Matt said, communication matters. The state communicated, other entities have not. Some of our requests have never even been acknowledged, despite follow-ups. The judge even noted that the lack of communication was the central issue in our case. We are not asking for new rights. We're asking for enforcement, reasonable timing, early identification of requests at risk for delay, and accessible remedies, so residents can participate meaningfully without being forced into serial litigation. Improvements earlier in the process could prevent formal complaints, but there is still a critical need for meaningful enforcement after a ruling. Public data is how residents hold governments accountable. It is not optional. We thank you for the opportunity to let us speak today.
Yeah, thank you so much for your testimony. We will move on to member questions. Does anyone have any questions for our testifiers? Representative Scott?
Thank you, and thank you for being with us today to testify. I'm sorry you've had a really horrible experience, and I'm so glad that you spoke so articulately about your experience and the different aspects of being denied or given it in a not easy form. And one of the things that I think everyone on this commission is cognizant of is the average taxpayer, like yourselves, cannot afford to litigate this and litigate this and litigate this. And government can just do stall tactics instead and just try to wait you out. And I think that's really a bad look for our agencies. I would be very interested in talking to you offline to see if there are any cages that can be rattled so that you can get the information you're after. And I just wanted to say thank you for being here more than anything.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yeah, well, thank you again for being here, and definitely feel free to follow up with Representative Scott and with the commission. With that, I'm going to backtrack just a second, and we have a quorum now, so I make a motion to approve the minutes. Does anyone want to make a motion to approve the minutes? Great, moved, and that's it, right? Do we need a second? That's it. Minutes are approved.
Oh, we vote on that.
Oh, do we vote?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Amazing. The minutes are approved, unless Rich is against the minutes. No. Okay. Okay, and now we're going to move on to a second testifier on our first agenda item, Mr. Eric Johnson. If you'd like to come up to the podium, and or I don't know if it's a podium, the table, and you can introduce yourself and proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the commission, good morning.
We can't hear you. Is the microphone on?
Can you hear me now? No. Oh, should I go these?
Sorry.
Sure.
All right, so you can introduce yourself and proceed. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the commission, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity.
I'm so sorry, sir. Do you mind moving closer to the mic? Thank you.
We've got a lot of furnace noise back here, so.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. Good morning. My name is, and thank you for the opportunity to testify. I also submitted my testimony in writing as well. My name is Eric Johnson, and I am a resident of Andover, Minnesota, and I'm here to speak about my experience with Chapter 13 when the state relies on third-party data, specifically polygraph data. This is important because courts generally prohibit polygraph results. However, polygraphs are authorized by the state in probation monitoring. The late theoretical physicist Richard Feynman once said, "I'd rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned." Polygraph instruments collect physiological data, like your pulse, blood pressure, breathing, and electrodermal activity, essentially electrical conductance of the skin that varies based on perspiration. That data is then operationalized into narrative summaries. The state relies on those summaries to make liberty-impacting decisions. While the state relies on third-party polygraph outcomes, Chapter 13 does not prescribe the mechanism by which the responsible authority must exercise access, retention, or correction obligations of the third party that generated the data, nor does it provide a remedy to compel a non-responsive third party to provide the data as requested. I am currently engaged in a Chapter 13 accuracy and completeness challenge involving a county community corrections department's reliance on a third-party polygraph narrative. In response to my initial request, the county provided a copy of the narrative summary and directed me to request the raw data from the third party, who has so far been non-responsive. That sequence illustrates a recurring governance problem. The state relies on third-party data to exercise authority, while responsibility for that data becomes unclear in practice. A related concern is data retention. Chapter 13 provides a 6-month cooldown until data can be requested again, while the county that I'm working with have data retention policies implemented to destroy data after 6 months. When that happens, data subject rights become functionally unenforceable because the data no longer exists. Clarifying how responsible authorities must ensure access, retention, and correction of third-party data, particularly in liberty-restricting contexts, would reduce ambiguity. It would improve compliance and confidence with Chapter 13, and it would strengthen the integrity of state decision-making. Because when the state relies on data that it cannot itself access, produce, or explain, enforcement of a narrative without the underlying data necessary to support the conclusion is similar to how a parent might respond to their child's question with the phrase, "because I said so." I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you so much. Are there any member questions? Senator Lucero?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not a question, just a comment, I guess a question. Does anybody know if we have a minimum for requirement? Because that's definitely an interesting dilemma. If there's a cooling off period and then the data retention is that same amount of time, that is not logical. So does anybody remember if we have a minimum 3-year, something to that effect? Well, if it doesn't exist, that's a great topic, I think, of 3 to 5 year minimum retention or something.
Yeah, Co-Chair Scott?
Well, this would be another situation where we need to look at those data retention schedules and review them. They haven't been reviewed for decades since, you get the pink slip for you got a message while you were out kind of thing. And just another reason, another factor and reason for reviewing that, for sure.
Yeah, I'll just say that this is definitely an issue that's on a lot of people's minds right now, which I've been gratified to see. The League of Women Voters has a position. They, during a recent legislative interview, they were asking everyone, do they support, I think it was like a permanent data retention for all government entities? And I was like, ooh, that seems like there are issues there. But it was nice to see that this is something that, a lot of us have been thinking about for a long time, but now more people are really thinking about critically. So what you talked about was something I have never thought about, and now I have, and we'll follow up on it. So thank you. Are there any other questions, Senator Limmer?
Thank you. Sir, could you give us any statutory cites, the statutes that are affecting this, or if there's county rules, regulations, ordinances, so that we could track it down and make a direct comparison? Or is every county a little different?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes, thank you for the question, Senator. I can follow up with you after, because I don't have the data immediately in front of me. But that is a request I also submitted to see what policies are in place as current. The reply I received from the county stated they destroy data after 6 months, and there could be differences in the way other counties handle data retention. I think it's sort of fragmented, but I don't want to speculate without having the data, so I can follow up with you after. I'd be happy to follow up and work with you and the commission on this.
Madam Chair,
Senator Limmer?
reason I ask the question is, as we all know, data rules, regulations, statutes sometimes can get pretty deeply embedded in our statute books, and anytime we have someone like this bringing this conflict in law before us, it's really important to get the cite that could benefit our researchers. We can certainly dig it up, but if you have a shortcut that you could give us, that would be appreciated.
Absolutely,
Okay,
Senator. I will.
thank you.
Thank you. And is it Anoka County is the county that you've been dealing with on this issue?
Yes, it is, Anoka County.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any more member questions? Looks like none. Great. Well, thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you.
And at this point, we're going to move on to member discussion. We had a long list of testifiers at our last hearing talking about various challenges and ideas around compliance and enforcement of the Data Practices Act. And so I will just open it up to member discussion. Co-Chair Scott?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think it goes without saying that there's some work to do here. We're still hearing, we hear from both sides of this, right? We hear from the government entities, we hear from the people that are doing the requesting, and there are challenges on both sides. And so something needs to give here, and some work needs to be done as legislators with all this input. And I'm hoping our fine staff member, Nick Nero, can compile some of the things that we've heard over the interim hearings and put that into a report, and we can have a starting point from there to launch into this. So there's so much work. It's almost overwhelming at times to think about how much work needs to be done. But I think one thing to remember is the fundamentals of the Data Practices Act are the same. How we nuance it to make it work best for the public and for entities is where the sausage is going to have to be made. So I don't know if anybody has any more specifics, but clearly our enforcement mechanisms are not effective. Most people can't afford even to get to the OA, the Office of Administrative Hearings, let alone beyond that. Even when, as the first testifiers from Owatonna said, even though we prevailed in court, as pro se litigants, there still was nothing they could do to follow up, and still haven't received a lot of the data that they requested. So that's not okay, and we need to put more teeth into the act, in my mind.
Senator Lucero?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I concur with that. There are certainly pain points and challenges from the government side fulfilling these data practices requests. But when I'm hearing many of the testimony, it is a David and Goliath scenario. And I fully concur. Some more teeth is needed in some areas. And I don't like clocks being run out, non-responsive, or plain ignorant to some of the responses, to some of the common sense. I think one of the testifiers we heard, it was just very common sense, the request, and they're just plain dumb in some scenarios, the government entity. And so we are going to come up, we have a very short session. I think we have 6 weeks, a third deadline once we come into session. And so for the staff to compile these, and once it's compiled of all the testimony we heard, there's going to be low-hanging fruit and some stuff that's going to take longer. And with a very abbreviated session that we have, I think it's very doable to tackle some of the low-hanging fruit, but we definitely should try to get something drafted and introduced very quickly here because of the short timeline. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I just had an idea that I'm going to say for the first time, and I had it 30 seconds ago. But, I generally like to give people the benefit of the doubt, both the government and people submitting data practices requests. I think everyone is, in general, acting in good faith with good intentions. And I've seen in a number of scenarios that communication breakdown and that lack of trust on both sides leads to these situations where we have these gridlocks. And so I just had this idea, what if we engage the Office of Collaboration and Dispute Resolution in some type of mediation role? And because I do think that there are ways to help people communicate more effectively in terms of, the goal isn't I want this data, the goal is I want to understand what is happening. I want, it's not the point isn't the data practices requests, it's government transparency. And I feel like perhaps if we had some type of mediator, that could help with just more effective communication. Sometimes, absolutely, there is bad faith and, obfuscation and obstruction. But I, in a lot of the scenarios that I've encountered, I feel like there is an effort to do right by the data practices request, and do right by the community on behalf of which people are requesting data. And I feel like better communication is part of the answer here. So it's just my random idea. But agree with my colleagues, there's a lot of work to be done here. And we have to do it this session because I'm leaving. So we got to do it fast. Any other comments? I know Senator Westland is online. Do you have any, I don't want to leave out our online colleagues. Okay, great. Well,
I do not. I will raise my hand if I have a query. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. Senator Limmer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Interesting idea to use a form of arbitration to settle. Would there be fees involved for someone to file an arbitration request?
I was thinking more mediation, but I was thinking about arbitration as I was talking about mediation. Right. I mean, arbitration is a whole different ballgame where we're actually trying to a third party will make a decision. Result. And I ultimately don't know if that works because the law is the law, and the arbitration can't just say, well, now the law doesn't apply in this case and the government does not have to provide X, Y, and Z. But I feel like mediation is a way to facilitate better communication. And so it's like a softer touch idea. And I think there would be some type of cost involved. The Office of Collaboration and Dispute Resolution is 2 amazing people, but they can't do everything for everyone. So, maybe that would involve an investment in an additional staff member I think they share offices with what's the office called? The Data Practices Office. Yeah, so they cross-pollinate. I know they're aware of these issues and have, that insight. So yeah, so that's what I'm envisioning. Maybe arbitration would work, I'm not sure.
Madam Chair, as long as there's an end result. I'm unfamiliar with mediation process, so I'm not sure if it actually would end in a result that would be in accord with our law. Obviously, if there's no acquiescence on the government part to release information, that we're not getting to any resolution right now if the requester never gets the information that they are legally entitled to request. So it would be a shame if every citizen had to go to court and go through all the expense. So perhaps mediation is the best, or at least an option. While I have the microphone here, I did want to remind us, and I hope that Minnesota is still going in the direction that we have been in the past, that we basically are a state that's a little different than other states in the country. We are a state that recognizes privacy of our citizens more so than others. They're being challenged by other government sources and requests and by the private sector. We've always had the approach, the general approach, that we try to protect the data on individual citizens as much as we can, while at the same time having government sources of data be as open as possible so that the public knows what the government is doing for them and to them. And I just hope that we can still continue on that direction as a state. I think it serves the public well. It holds people that want to take advantage of certain governmental systems. It gives them warning that they have to work within certain parameters. And I just think over the years, it has served our state of Minnesota very well. It sets the rules, it sets the parameters, and it gives openness to government. And by doing that, we can celebrate a little bit more transparency. I know other states do not have that same degree. And oftentimes they become subject to pressures of lobbyists from private sectors or certain government entities as well. So I just hope that Minnesota can continue in this vein. And it's something that we have to remind ourselves from year to year. Because if we don't, we will drift and we'll fall victim to the temptation of others. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I've been really grateful for the number of hearings that we've had over the past months to dig deeper into these conversations and not just sort of passively let time pass without revisiting to ensure that we are being deliberate about how we balance. So thank you. I think we'll move on to our next agenda item. Our next agenda item is a discussion of the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension's Fusion Center. Unfortunately, the BCA could not be with us today, but we imagine that we'll have some questions for them, and maybe they can make it to our next hearing. Just for the general public, the Fusion Center, which we'll be discussing, has a new annual report requirement that's been in place for a couple of years. They are a center within the BCA that collects and shares data across state and federal government entities. And there have been concerns over the years about, what data is being collected and where is it being shared and for what purpose. And so we created an annual report so that the general public would have a better idea of what this very powerful, surveillance entity is doing, so that there would be some, public oversight. and insight into those activities. And so before, we'll have member discussion as well of these two reports that are in the committee materials, but we will move on to testimony. And Matt Ealing will be testifying on behalf of the Minnesotan for Open Government. And you can introduce yourself and proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt Ealing, Minnesotans for Open Government. Before I start, I want to thank those who helped to bring this report to life, namely Mr. Neumeister, who worked on this extensively, yourself, Madam Chair, and Senator Limmer. The enabling legislation for this report that you have before you was a tremendous example of the bipartisan effort that's always necessary to ensure government transparency and accountability. In regard to the Minnesota Fusion Center, the center does provide a useful service to the state by collecting and aggregating information about ongoing and emergent threats. We live in turbulent times, and information collection is a necessary part of the role of law enforcement. However, anytime the government collects data on individuals, it is possible that such data could be abused, and the need for oversight is why many parties, including our organization, were interested in seeing a public Fusion Center report developed. The Fusion Center report is compiled on an annual basis. It contains operational metrics on budgets and staffing, and includes what we think is even more important information, such as overviews of the kinds of information processed by the center, the kinds of databases it employs, who it shares its records with, and the outcomes of its data collection. This morning, I'll provide a brief snapshot of some of these data elements and how they interact in the report. The Fusion Center utilizes various record sets in the performance of its duties. One of those sets involves what are called SARs, or Suspicious Activity Reports. These are primarily leads generated by law enforcement entities. And under the the center's privacy policy, SARs must be collected in a lawful manner and meet several other listed criteria. SARs that meet the reasonable suspicion standard are processed further, while those that do not are maintained for 1 year before being purged, if reasonable suspicion of criminal activity has not been developed from those reports. And this purging requirement is aimed at ensuring that the center does not become a warehouse for baseless tips or pure political surveillance, whether that's surveillance of anti-war protesters or anti-abortion protesters. If SARs are indeed processed further, they may either become BCA case files for open criminal investigations, they may be provided to other law enforcement agencies for criminal investigative purposes, or they may be provided to outside agencies as RFIs, or requests for information. The Fusion Center report reveals trends based on the total numbers of these reported events. For instance, the 2024 Fusion Center report shows that the center processed 583 SARs, with 119 of those turning into BCA case files and another 209 being referred out. So having this information available permits legislators and the public to better understand Fusion Center activity and to evaluate whether or not a gap exists between data collection and the conversion of that data into criminal investigations. If such a gap were too large, it could be an indication of data collection becoming decoupled from law enforcement activity, warranting further review by lawmakers. The number of Fusion Center files that are purged every year is also reported and can likewise be analyzed for trends. If the purge rate is low, for instance, relative to the total number of files collected, that may also be indicative of a problem. It could indicate that too much data is being maintained that does not meet the standards required by the center's privacy policy. The number of requests for information that are sent out from the Fusion Center is also tabulated in the report. In 2023, the center received 985 RFIs, and a year later, the center received 992. Watching these numbers is instructive since they indicate the level of external interest in the Fusion Center's work product, including interest from the federal government. In addition, the report lists the content of data requests made to the center, highlighting what the public is curious about in regard to the center's activities. So having this information publicly compiled is beneficial for oversight, since there is always a danger that the government can use information collection to target and chill protected speech activities by conflating those protected activities with crime or terrorism. And over the course of our history, this has occurred by executive branch actors from both political parties and has impacted people across the political spectrum. For instance, if you look at page 5 of our exhibit packet, you will see excerpts from a data request made to the Minnesota BCA for tips submitted to the COVID-era tip line operated by that agency. Such tips were solicited by the state government and resulted in members of the public calling in reports about their neighbors attending religious services, for instance. Star Tribune reporting indicated that the tip line was operated out of the Minnesota Fusion Center, which became part of the conversation that motivated the Fusion Center reporting legislation. And in recent weeks, Minnesota has been at the center of a federal immigration operation involving thousands of agents and a growing controversy over search and seizure, as well as tactics that have impacted First Amendment activity. If you look at page 6 of our packet, you will see an excerpt from a preliminary injunction order in one of the ongoing lawsuits over that federal activity. And that page describes a declaration submitted by a couple who had been stopped on their way to observe ICE activity, had been held at gunpoint, and were then told that federal agents, quote, knew where to find them. And this dynamic is described in different variations throughout that court order and has been noted elsewhere as well, which indicates that federal agents appear to be collecting and sharing home address information, tying it to individuals, and then disclosing that same information to those individuals in an apparent attempt to deter them from observing ICE activity. And again, if this is going on, it could be used against any protest group on any side of the ideological spectrum. And so since the numerical totals for requests for information processed by the center are part of the Fusion Center's reporting, and since the center itself involves both state and federal personnel, it'll be important in the future to review RFIs and other data from this year to shed light on how federal information sharing has played out during Operation Metro Surge. And it'll have lessons, I think, for the future as well. So, Madam Chair and members, thank you for your time and attention regarding this very important report, and thank you for all the work that you have done as a legislature to make this possible.
Thank you so much for your expertise and testimony. Any member questions for a testifier? Senator Lucero?
Well, not for the testifier necessarily, but just a comment. So I do cybersecurity for a living, been doing that for over 20 years now. And it was earlier in my career that I was asked a very important question. And so for those of us in cybersecurity, every organization, I should say every, most organizations have computer network infrastructure of some kind, made up of laptops, workstations, servers, router switches, various equipment. The purpose of the cybersecurity then is not only to be monitoring for anomalies and activity from external threats that want to come in, but also be monitoring the activity on the inside, because insider threat are also very real and pose risks to organizations. And so anyway, I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues in a different department. I think he was a server administrator, and I told him, I described the basics of what we do in the relationship between cybersecurity and his department, where I was kind of being flippant at the time, tongue in cheek, and I said, well, we watch what you do to make sure you're doing acceptable things. And the question that he posed me was, well, Eric, if you're watching us, who's watching the watchers? And that's a very real question, and very important question, and something I think is very relevant to this. Those in the Fusion Center, I have no doubt that the great staff of the BCA are nothing but professionals. But generally speaking, when any organization that has any kind of authority or power goes unchecked for too long, attitudes can change, and they can begin to potentially abuse power. And I think we saw that, in the last decade here at the national level, being unchecked, lack of oversight, and they took liberties at infringing on law-abiding citizens' personal information and activity and things like that. And so I think these are definitely important conversations, and there is a tug of war there, because there is a very real need for activities that are happening for law enforcement that's trying to protect us to have a single location to sort through information and try to make connections where associations are definitely needed to understand and how to respond, again, for safety purposes. At the same time, again, accountability and oversight is needed because who's watching the watchers? So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other member discussion, questions? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just, everything you said, just ditto. I have these concerns too. On a much less philosophical and more granular note, I was looking between the two reports, and I just thought it was interesting, just some of the numbers and trends. It'll be interesting to see our next report come out in February. In 2023, there were 336 suspicious activity reports. In 2024, there were 583. And then interestingly, in 2023, 8 of the 336 became BCA files. In 2024, 119 of the 583 became BCA files. So I just thought that's a dramatically different number. And then in 2023, 45 of 336 were referred to the FBI. And in 2024, 168 were referred to the FBI out of a larger pool. I don't know. It'll just be interesting. I don't know that 2 years really tells us much, but I'll be interested to see if that trend, how those trends play out in the next report. I also noticed, maybe you know about this technology, it's called Fusus. They mentioned on page 10 of the 2024 report, and it said it's this tool which had like flock vibes to me, that their role is, quote, integrating public and private real-time video to get like a real-time, like where people are going, like Senator Limmer was talking about at our last hearing, like knowing where we're going before we do. And yeah, we just need to, like, who watches the watchers? We need to be those people. So I think it would be wonderful if Superintendent Evans or someone from the Fusion Center could join us at our next hearing to maybe share their thoughts after the next report is issued, which will be in February next month. So any other comments by members? Oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Neumeister, you had some testimony?
I was going to testify.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I just had thoughts and just kept going. But please introduce yourself and proceed. Thank you.
Madam, for the chair and commission, my name is Rich Neumeister. The Fusion Center concept came around about almost after 2001, so 9/11. St. Paul or Minnesota it hit in 2005, and again, as there's been an individual been around for a long time, and when these issues come around, that person gets involved, meaning myself. So I played a role. I was on the governing board of the Fusion Center. Myself, Bob Sikora, who some of you may remember, to come up with a privacy policy, which we did, and worked, and now it's been implemented. And the Fusion Center historically didn't have a lot of oomph because it relied a lot on federal funds. It was not like other Fusion Centers, which are a lot of issues in other states. But now the Fusion Center has steady state funding. They are enlarging. They're starting to focus. So this is where I think even more the angst starts to happen. Historically, in 2010 and 2011, the Fusion Center played a role. Some of you may remember that the Mall of America got involved in an incident where they were tracking people who wore Islamic or Arabic wear, or because of the color of their skin, and they took pictures. They were being reported through with suspicious activity reports up to the Fusion Center and created lots of issues. There's a lot of history to that. So so it just happens in our local area too. So I come from a perspective of knowing when you build it and when it starts going, it'll become an engine. So some of the stats that were being referred to are important for Superintendent Evans and the director to answer publicly. Not to, I'm very familiar with all these people. I've known all the superintendents since 1978 and the directors of the Fusion Center. So I want to just give some points about the reports, and it's already been highlighted. But I think one of the things that's interesting is to take a look at the development of the government databases and the private databases that the Fusion Center uses. Now, granted, they have the resources to fund these or to develop them. So one of the interesting questions that I would ask is, how many are using the inquiry of this powerful, all these databases, just for the general request for, hey, can you tell me about Rich Newmeister, that goofy-looking guy with that gray mustache, or whatever it might be. So then they put it in, something comes back. So I don't know how often, is that considered a RFI, request for information, or is it not? I have no idea. But I do see that trend, like you might remember CISA, which is the something initiative in Hennepin County, which really has the only facial recognition service. So where all these law enforcement entities, they go to CISA, Hennepin County, for that facial recognition. Is that the same guy, Rich Newmeister with the mustache? No, he doesn't have a mustache, so it must not be Rich Newmeister, but maybe he shaved it. So is BCA Fusion Center playing that role? Also, as Madam Chair, as you pointed out, some of these databases and one of the other things are becoming AI directed. I have learned that some law enforcement agencies are just buying an AI platform or just using what's available on an AI platform to look up who is Rich Newmeister. I'm not saying me, but I'm using myself as an example. And all of a sudden, if you look up somebody or even look up, you'll get a 2-page thing because they scrape all the public things wherever you touch publicly, at a testimony, at this, at that. So already the law enforcement entity has. So there are some things that are happening. I share some perspective, and hopefully the superintendent's listening, or the director, and they'll come and ask, and with the tough questions that I know that you all have. And once again, I appreciate historically all the legislators that were involved on this. It was a tough nut to crack, and got done. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, yeah, we have another testifier. You can introduce yourself for the record and proceed. Thank you.
First time. Hello, my name is Ben Fishman. I am a pro se litigant as of yesterday, as well as a United States Senate candidate, independent. I used to work for Cisco Systems as well as Microsoft. So surveillance capitalism is top of mind for me. For example, architectures of control. That's what's at hand when we're talking about these fusion technologies or facial recognition. And where do we draw the line between conflicts of interest? I was a victim of a crime. A carjacking ensued in 2021 in the driving parking lot of the Jewish Community and Relations Council. Crime was never solved. Later today, I'm going to watch the body camera footage for the first time. No one offered any kind of legal support. I had to teach myself this. I would encourage the state of Minnesota to follow along at the SCOTUS level with respect to Cisco's suit against the Hwadong religion. I am coming at this as a pro-business person, and I just want to make sure that the entire state is tracking this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And I thought it was interesting. We did ask in the reporting requirement, what are the tools that they use, including the use of artificial intelligence, and it's not listed. And I had asked more recently, and they're apparently not using AI at this time in conjunction with the Fusion Center. And the other just big picture thought I had is I'm on the BCA advisory group, and they presented about their really impressive work, sort of interrupting that sort of continuum that leads to mass shootings, and just the ways that there are ways to intervene and support people who might be on a path where we might be getting suspicious activity reports, but there are ways to like intervene to effectively, put that person on a better path. So I think that I just think a lot very holistically about public safety investments and like what do we need to be doing around mental health. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of answers to these numbers about suspicious activity reports, and just look forward to continuing that conversation as well. Sorry, that was kind of an abstract thought, but I wanted to share it. Senator Lucero?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to highlight two terms that the testifier just used, and I have not heard them. I love them. Surveillance capitalism. While it's not directly related to the Fusion Center, it certainly overlaps in terms of there's billions of dollars out there that I think are happening in the just under the surface of these private sector companies that are building out the capability to monitor and control and surveil. And while it may not be the government, these private sector companies are certainly engaged in this behavior, collecting this information, data mining, creating profiles that the government will then go as a customer to purchase, and that's a concern. Then the other term I heard was architecture of control, and that is also something that's impacting each and every one of us here in this room and across the state and across the country, because there are algorithms, whether it be social media, there's all kinds of mechanisms that are, while we may not even recognize the influence and impact it's having on us, it may not necessarily be controlling us, but it's certainly steering us in different walks of our life, and we may not even be aware. And so these are very real forces that are impacting our daily lives. So I appreciate that terminology and something that this commission certainly appreciates and continues to try to bring awareness and put some controls in place. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. I think we'll move on to our, I turned off the mic in the middle of talking. The next agenda item, which is House File 103, which I'll be presenting. So I will pass the gavel over to my co-chair. So is this mic working? Seems
Yep.
like it is. Okay.
Yeah. Whenever you're ready, Co-Chair Feist, go ahead with
Thank you, Madam Chair.
presentation.
So I am very excited to be presenting this bill in this moment when we are seeing the impact of ubiquitous coordinated surveillance in our state, as described really well by Mr. Ealing. I'm troubled by the use of data collected by one agency for a stated purpose now being accessed by another agency for an entirely different purpose of sweeping surveillance. While the target of this surveillance may not be me right now, I worry about which outgroup will be next, depending on who holds the levers of power. As we have discussed in this committee, the ways that public and private entities collect, utilize, and share our personal data have real implications for our freedom of movement. This data sharing and surveillance impedes all our constitutional rights, and we should be very worried. House File 103 would prohibit dragnet reverse warrants in most circumstances. These warrants are used to identify individuals within a certain mile radius of a crime. They are also used during investigations to round up suspects who entered specific search phrases. The collective scope of such warrants directed at technology companies such as Google are often so expansive in time and geography that they gather data on tens of thousands of private law-abiding citizens. These searches are becoming increasingly common. In one jurisdiction, we saw a 5,300% increase in their use in just a 2-year period. In Minnesota, we have seen a staggering 686% increase in a recent 2-year period. These warrants are a violation of our constitutional rights to privacy. This impacts our ability to travel freely where we wish and to seek information that we need. Further, they have not been proven effective as an investigation tool, where law enforcement essentially searches for a needle in a haystack by exponentially increasing the size of that haystack. Across the country, these searches are being found unconstitutional by state and federal courts. Relying on them in Minnesota would make many convictions vulnerable to being overturned in the future. For these reasons, this is an important step for Minnesota to take to get ahead of this problematic intrusion on our privacy and to ensure that investigations that are successful are upheld by our courts. My experts will provide additional details and context for why this is an urgent issue to address. And with that, I'll turn it over to the testifiers. And I believe Mr. Marlowe is online.
Mr. Marlowe, if you're there, go ahead and state your name for the record and go on with your testimony, please.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. My name is Chad Marlowe, and I am a senior policy counsel at the ACLU's national office, and where the focus of my work is on privacy, surveillance, and technology issues. I'd like to begin my testimony with a basic question. What is a reverse warrant? There are actually 2 types of reverse warrants: reverse location warrants, which are otherwise known as geofence warrants, and reverse keyword warrants. A reverse location warrant functions by having the government draw a virtual geofence around a location of interest. Once the geofence is created, the reverse location warrant requires a third-party data collector to access private location data to identify every person who is within the geofence during a specified time. This process violates individuals' privacy by securing their identity and location, even though none are suspected of committing a crime. Once a person is identified, they will remain under criminal suspicion and be subjected to further privacy intrusions while the government seeks to determine if they are a legitimate suspect. Reverse keyword warrants involve a government demand issued to an internet search provider to identify every person who entered a specific word or phrase into their online search engine, such as a Google search for Planned Parenthood or Trump rally. Reverse keyword warrants violate privacy by identifying every person who entered a search term online, even though none are suspected of a crime. And again, until their innocence is established, every one of them will remain under criminal suspicion and be subject to further privacy invasions. The ACLU has concluded that reverse warrants are an unconstitutional 21st century version of a general warrant because they authorize broad searches and seizures without identifying a specific person who is believed to have committed a specific crime. The United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit agrees with our position, while the Fourth Circuit has taken the opposite view, and that latter circuit's case is now headed to the United States Supreme Court. Regardless of what the Supreme Court decides, one thing it will not do is pass judgment on whether using reverse warrants, if constitutional, is safe and appropriate as a matter of public policy. That decision will be left up to you. Historically, America's opposition to general warrants dates back to pre-Revolutionary War times, when the British king used writs of assistance to authorize wide-ranging searches of anyone, anywhere, at any time. These hated writs spurred the American colonies towards revolution and directly motivated James Madison's crafting of the Fourth Amendment. For over 2 centuries, the Fourth Amendment unequivocally ended the use of general warrants in the United States. However, recent advances in digital technology, the mass collection of personal data, and the growing regularity of storing highly sensitive information in data form outside of people's homes gave rise to a new form of general warrant that can sweep up massive amounts of personal data without people's knowledge or permission. That is the reverse warrant. The threat these technologically supercharged general warrants pose is real and growing. Although data regarding their issuance is hard to come by, we do have some troubling data from Google, which has been one of their most common targets. Here in Minnesota, in 2018, Google received 22 reverse location warrants from state and local law enforcement. But just 1 year later, the number of reverse warrants Google received from Minnesota jumped a staggering 841% to 207. And that constitutes just the reverse location warrants sent to a single technology company. We have no idea how many reverse warrants Minnesota issued in total. Speaking of Minnesota's use of reverse warrants, in 2024, following the hit-and-run death of Dr. Kathy Donovan in Mille Lacs County, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension got a reverse keyword warrant ordering Google to hand over the IP addresses of every person who searched the keywords Mille Lacs hit-and-run or Highway 169 hit-and-run over a 4-day period. That means every person who wanted to learn more about the death of a beloved community member had their privacy violated and was turned into a potential homicide suspect simply because they searched Google for news about a local tragedy. And by the way, that crime was never solved. And it is important to note that while reverse warrants threaten everyone's privacy, they present a heightened risk for members of vulnerable populations. As previously noted, reverse warrants turn innocent people into criminal suspects. And in 2026, for persons of color, undocumented persons, persons seeking abortion care or gender-affirming care, and persons engaged in political protests, all of whom are being actively targeted during these very difficult times, being identified as a potential criminal suspect not only threatens their privacy, it can place their freedom and even their lives at risk. Few places are more aware of that fact than Minnesota. Ultimately, banning reverse warrants will improve community safety, not compromise it. This is because when it comes to identifying criminals, reverse warrants are very good at increasing the size of the haystack, but very poor at finding the needle. Remember the case of Kathy Donovan, where Minnesota law enforcement sought the identities of everyone who Googled information about that hit and run? Well, what if that driver had never searched the internet for news of the event? Or what if the driver used a different search engine like Bing or DuckDuckGo? The result is law enforcement ends up chasing down a large pool of suspects that doesn't include the criminal, which is likely what happened in that unsolved case. And this is the real story of reverse warrants. They are a technologically advanced law enforcement tool that is very good at harming innocent people and very bad at solving crimes. It's time for Minnesota to take action. You certainly do not need to hear that from me. And banning the use of reverse warrants by adopting HF 103 is a great place to start. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I would be happy to answer any questions the commission may have.
Thank you for your testimony. I think what we'll do is go through all the testifiers, and then if there are member questions, we'll ask that. And so I would just encourage Mr. Marlowe, if you could stay online in case there are any questions for you, that would be helpful. Next is Matt Ealing. And on deck is Munira Mohammed. And after that, Mark Stignani.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt Ealing, I'm testifying on my own behalf. Minnesotans for Open Government, we only take positions on government information policy issues, but I have an interest in the Fourth Amendment and have testified for Fourth Amendment-related bills that you have brought forward, Madam Chair, as well as others in the past. I'm here to speak in support of Representative Feist, Chair Feist's bill today, mostly to offer my support and to stay in the conversation. Happy to discuss the particulars as it moves forward. The only technical note I would have is in the exigency section, lines 2.20 and 2.21. I'd personally like to discuss that a little bit further because the exigency trigger is reliant on a Chapter 13, some Chapter 12 definitions up in 2.13 and 2.14. I think because of the way that Chapter 13 has been interpreted fairly broadly over the last few years, it's probably worth looking at whether the exigency language could be tightened up. But very supportive of the effort and very thankful for this coming forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ealing. All right, next, Munira Mohammed with the ACLU of Minnesota. Go ahead and introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony.
Hello, Senate and House members. My name is Manira Mohammed, and I am the Policy Associate for the ACLU of Minnesota. You heard our colleague Chad Marlowe speak, and he's our national expert, so he'll be a great resource for the committee. But I just wanted to add a bit more information. Obviously, I agree with everything Chad said on the general nature of these warrants, the really sensitive data that they collect, the broad scope. But I also wanted to highlight two stories, and I linked them in my testimony so that people could go back and check. But a local reporter, Tony Webster, in 2019 wrote a really great story that was very comprehensive, very long, and it looked at multiple cities within Minnesota, which included Eden Prairie as well as Brooklyn Park. So I want to speak about that. So the first in this local story by Tony Webster in NPR News, Webster reported that in 2019, Eden Prairie police surveilled tens of thousands of people using a reverse warrant. Police collected data from Google within a dense urban area using both a 6-hour and a 33-hour window. That warrant swept in anyone who just passed through the busy area, countless random people who live, work, or even drove just past. So these were looking at these businesses that these owners who were burglarized and had money stolen from them. It was a reverse warrant on their businesses, collecting the traffic of anyone who passed by that business, and it was a pretty big area that the reverse warrant was collecting data from. In the end, police identified the suspects accused of the burglary using other investigative techniques without Google's data. Yet their invasion of privacy of innocent individuals remains. So it turned out that the reverse warrant wasn't even needed to solve the case. The story also illustrates how judges who are supposed to act as a firewall often aren't given proper information or clarity about what they're signing off on. You know, a lot of these reverse warrants will have very technical data. So they'll have the coordinates of the geographical area of the geofence warrant, so the actual space, and then it'll say the hours, so that 6-hour window and that 33-hour window. So it's really hard for the judge to visualize just how many people are within that area within multiple days. It could be thousands. So it's really hard to visualize, and judges are often making these decisions within minutes. The second story is an investigative report by the ACLU of Northern California. In this report from ACLU, they analyzed thousands of warrants from January 2018 to August 2021. The results of their investigation showed the shocking scale of these reverse warrants, which included 121 homes, 82 apartments, 32 bars and restaurants, 12 places of worship, 7 schools and daycares, and 7 medical care sites. One warrant that they looked at had an error within it that led to the capturing of data of a 2-mile stretch of San Francisco. So this error, which they thought was from a typo, included capturing the data of a United Nations building, a courthouse, and a senior center. And that was all the result of an error within the reverse warrant that the judge signed off on. This highlights the troubling issue that reverse warrants are not error-proof and are ultimately a dragnet surveillance tool. So overall, I do agree with Chad that these are really fishing expeditions and that everyone is essentially guilty until proven innocent and surveilled as suspects of a crime that they haven't committed. So the ACLU stands with Representative Feist in support of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next up is Mark Stignani. Welcome to the commission, and please state your name for the record and continue on with your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. My name is Mark Stignani. I am an engineer, and I am also an attorney. I've spent 30 years in the data industry, both on the sides of the commercial side and on the defense side. I'm here testifying basically in support of the bill, but I would like to at least address a few gaps, I think, in the technology that are not covered by the bill in its definition. So the bill does not deal with alternative location tracking, including license plate readers, facial recognition systems that can be fixed or deployed in a temporary standpoint. It does not cover near-field communications or Bluetooth beacons. So Persons within the range of a Bluetooth device can be pulled and recorded for that purpose. It doesn't cover traditional cell phone tower dumps, which are not explicitly covered in this. It doesn't cover devices, wearable devices like fitness trackers or watches, things like that, which aren't explicitly location-based, but they're just nearness-based. It doesn't cover use of things like flock cameras, which are deployed for other uses in the Twin Cities. It doesn't cover personal and home security networks like Ring. So my whole basis here is that technology has often outstripped the ability of legislation to catch it or to cover it. So part of what I'm hoping to do here is give some additional definitions for you, possible enhanced terminology to be put in there that would also help catch the purpose and the benefit of this act. Being in the commercial data business for as long as I have, much of the data that is being requested in a warrant is already commercially available and can be combined, construed in hybrid format, which may make some of the warrant requirements unnecessary. So my recommendations to strengthen this would be explicitly cover some of the emerging technologies that do not rely on location. They rely more on surveillance, they rely more on presence. So I would urge the definition of reverse presence warrants and reverse surveillance warrants, which would also cover the non-location and non-tracking warrant language as well as here. I would include prohibition of or supplementation of commercial data brokers' data to circumvent and bypass the warrant. I would also urge that we have coverage of the explicit technologies that are not location-based. They are more identity-based. They are more presence-based. I would also urge and mandate, as we heard earlier in other testimony, the minimum use policy, where you have an early deletion and early removal of the process of people who are not part of the investigation, and limitation of that for any purpose held longer. I'd also urge the deletion of any existing large databases that have been already created before this has been brought in and turned into law. With that, I think that there's, good hope for this thing, but I think that the thing here is that you really have to close the loopholes before somebody just bypasses the warrant laws you go forward. I appreciate your time. Thank you for your attention, and I would take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Stagnini. That's pretty crazy stuff that you wanted to add. I mean, it's stuff that is very worthwhile that wasn't on my radar. I don't know about yours, Co-Chair Feist, but Mr. Neumeister, looks like you would like to testify. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, for the record, my name is Rich Neumeister. Well, here we are again, playing catch-up with technology. Not ketchup, but catch-up. You know what I mean. Law enforcement, hey, we got this good deal. Let's do it. And then we find out about it. The public finds out about it. Now, as we all know, for at least 12 years ago, we found out about Stingray, which I was very much involved in. Same kind of dynamic technology. We did legislation, license plate readers. We can go on and on. So here we are. So first of all, I think that there needs to be some type of legislation that says when there is any type of surveillance data or technology used, there shall be, in law enforcement, particularly the BCA, a report to give at least a notice to the legislature. Now, as Madam Chair, as Senator Limmer knows, we put in the data practices, 1382 subdivision 2030 or 30, I think, that said that you can't hide the use of surveillance data or technology. So the public, that's why we know a lot more about the kind of technology you can't use. So I think something like, we don't get in the same place here, again, with technology, which is part of why we have House File 103. In regards to the search warrant or the court order, what it's to be used, I think it's important for the court order or the warrant to be public, eventually, public, just like a regular search warrant. Now, I have not seen what these geofencing reverse order look like, but I hope they're not tracking what was done with tracking warrants. Madam Chair, Senator Limmer, and other folks who've been around it know that the big fight that was, are they public or are they not? We shouldn't be doing that. These should be public and go down the regular route of regular search warrant kind of process. The other thing is that I agree with the previous testifier. There needs to be guardrails. They should not be collecting data on who they think, and once a determination is made, because law enforcement likes to use data in all kinds of ways. Hey, let's put all the location data historically, and we'll keep it forever. So if something comes up, we'll be able to see. This is one of the major points about the license plate reader. Should we keep it at 0, 7 days? Well, 12 years ago, it became 60 days, I think, if I remember right. So that's an important item too, and I don't see that really addressed. Guardrails can't be used for other, there's all 2 or 3 kinds of things. And then I think there should not be a good faith exception. I don't know if legislation has been done historically. I have not gone down that rank. But, being here for 5 decades, you hear the argument of good faith a lot. It's a good faith. It's in good faith. But that's one of the big loopholes about what's happening here. Some courts have said it's unconstitutional, but they'll say, oh, well, it's in good faith, though. So they'll let the violation, the technology rule win because of the good faith exception. So, Madam Chair, members of the commission, those are my comments. And this is an important item. It's bipartisan. It should not be the political dynamic. Again, we're in the same boat that I've seen historically. Technology, legislature, the public find out, and now we're playing catch up. So I encourage some of the things that I described, particularly where the law enforcement has to knock on our door. And I mean the public's and the policymakers' door. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I noticed by the agenda, it seems like we only have proponents of this legislation. Was anyone invited from the law enforcement community to give testimony today?
Co-Chair Feist.
I did invite the BCA to attend this hearing, and no one was available.
Okay. Madam Chair.
Senator Limmer.
I'm kind of in the analytic phase of reviewing this for the first time. And the question that it's more of a suggestion. Under the exceptions listed on 2.13, where the definition of sudden emergency would create an exception to the use of this process, I might suggest a number 6 as search for a missing person. That doesn't seem to be recognized in it. Some of these sub-settings, the numbers 1 through 5, might need some definition to define what they are, give it a little tightness. I see that on page 3, line 6, there's a reference, no court shall issue. Is that a potential separation of power issue where the legislature is telling the judicial branch what they shall and shall not do? We have offered mandatory prison sentences for certain crimes in statute, and courts they kind of frown on that when, especially this branch of government in this state. By doing that, and also the admissibility of evidence found on lines 3.16, we're also telling the courts what they can and cannot rule as admissible. That violates judicial discretion. So I think I would suggest that we examine those elements so that we don't get hung up by the courts and they refute in some cases. Some courts, some judges may ignore. And they have a legal right to ignore the statutes when it comes to separation of power references. So those are on my first very quick read of this, that's what I would suggest we address first.
Thank you, Senator. Co-Chair Feist.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for your input and these thoughts. I'm very excited to be having this hearing because this is a really complicated bill and it requires this type of dialogue and deep thought. With respect to search for a missing person, I'm open to that. I'd want to think about how to phrase it. I think that the general assumption is that in the moment of like a natural disaster that this would be used for that purpose, but it could be that one person is missing, not in a natural disaster, and it still might be a useful tool. Although it wouldn't be a reverse warrant. It would be just, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I'm definitely open to using warrants to gather data for missing people. We were able to come to some good language around the use of drones this last legislative session to search for missing people. With respect to separation of powers, on your second point first, I'm not at all worried. With respect to admissibility rules, we have a lot of examples in statute where we look at, for example, just this last session, we passed legislation around inadmissibility of evidence in the context of restorative practices to mirror privileges, attorney-client privilege, religious leaders' privilege, mediation privilege. So that's something that the legislature has done traditionally, and I don't see separation of powers issue. With respect to the larger question of are we allowed to say what can or cannot be issued, what a warrant can or cannot be issued for, I don't have that concern. I think that we have a right and an obligation as a legislature to protect our constitutional rights to privacy. And so, open to continuing that conversation because I think it is an important one. But, other circuits like the Fifth Circuit have already found reverse warrants unconstitutional in and of themselves. So, it's always this delicate dance between the different bodies to make sure we are staying in our lanes. But I feel like this is an appropriate lane for the legislature.
Madam Chair.
Follow up? Senator Limmer.
Thank you. Representative Feist, in that reference to the 5th Judicial District, have they ruled on that? And if they have, do you know if it's going to be appealed?
Chair Feist.
So the Fifth Circuit, I'm going to eventually punt this to Chad Marlowe, who's the real expert here. But my understanding is that the Fifth Circuit decision found that reverse warrants are an unconstitutional invasion of privacy and that was not appealed. My understanding is that the Fourth Circuit didn't necessarily find the opposite, but they had a different interpretation and that has been appealed to the Supreme Court. And I kind of like our odds at the Supreme Court right now on this issue, but I would love for Chad Marlowe to respond if that's okay.
Mr. Marlowe.
Yes, so the ruling by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which covers Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, I believe, was basically that reverse warrants were a general warrant and therefore unconstitutional under the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is Virginia, the Carolinas, West Virginia, I believe Maryland as well, what they found was that there was it wasn't so much a decision about the reverse warrants as it was a decision based in that there was not an expectation of privacy in people's location information, and so therefore there was not a Fourth Amendment question being posed. So obviously the Supreme Court will render judgment on that. I never know where the Supreme Court's going to come out on anything, unfortunately. But what I would say, though, and I do think this is important, is that just because if the Supreme Court were to rule that reverse warrants are constitutional, it does not necessarily mean that Minnesota has to allow them, any more so than that the Supreme Court very regretfully ruled that states have the ability to outlaw abortion, but that does not mean that Minnesota had to outlaw abortion. It just means they had the ability to do it. So we will see where the Supreme Court comes out, but if they allow reverse warrants, if they do not follow the Fifth Circuit, there will then be the public policy question for this body to decide whether or not they think it's a tool that should be used in this state.
Thank you. Chair Feist, any further comments?
Not on the specific
Okay.
input, but happy to continue the conversation.
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Yes,
The
Senator Limmer.
reason why I put or suggested the search for a missing person is I was actually thinking of the Amber Alert that went through the Twin Cities just yesterday and how they found the little girl that was missing. But nevertheless, I could see where a location search might come into play, but perhaps the wording that I suggest is not as artful as you would like, might be a better way to say it, but nevertheless, I think there should be some latitude for the use in that narrow circumstance.
Chair Feist.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that we should be using surveillance tools when we have a missing person and we can specifically search for them using technology. This bill is intended, and if it's unintentionally impacting what you're describing, we want to address that. But the intention is more to address sort of the use of these broad warrants where we're not actually identifying a specific person that we're searching for, and that's the issue. So when we're searching for a specific person using technology, that's a different question than when we're saying who all happened to be in a certain place at a certain time or who all happened to search for a certain term. It's more the indiscriminate surveillance of private citizens that this bill is intended to address.
Thank you. And I believe Mr. Marlowe had his hand up virtually there if he wants to weigh in.
I'm so pleased you noticed. I never know whether these technologies will work, but this actually raised just one issue that I just wanted to clarify because I think it's very important. Nothing in the ban on reverse warrants would prevent seeking location information or even keyword searches as to a particular person if there is reasonable suspicion or probable cause, depending on the scenario, to be interested in that. So, in the case of a missing person, you'll know their phone, you'll know, the IMSI number, you can look for that particular phone. And if I am suspected of committing a crime, the police can always get a warrant for my location information or for my internet searches. What reverse warrants do is it says, give me everyone's location or everyone's internet searches. So just to make that distinction, because that may be something that comes up when people are thinking about this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Marlowe. And I think the Amber Alert yesterday, the little girl was last seen getting off the school bus. Wasn't that correct? And so there would be like an idea, at least location-wise, where she was last seen. So I think it is an issue. And what are the other things called silver alerts, something like that for elderly that may wander off. So I think there is some validity to looking into that further. Yeah, so, and I was just, when you started presenting your bill, Chair Feist, I leaned over to our friendly tech guy over here and I said, if you couple reverse warrants with AI, you got a real problem, because then you're sweeping all these people that were in an area, a geolocation area at one time, and everything that goes, as we know with AI, everything that you use AI for stays in AI to build more and more and more. So it's just, it's very concerning. Mm-hmm. Chair Feist, anything else that you would like to add?
I just wanted to emphasize again, this is an increasingly important issue. As Mr. Neumeister said, it is virtually impossible to get ahead of these technologies and their use, but I think we always should try. And I really like just a couple of ideas that Mr. Neumeister mentioned regarding a report on the use of these reverse warrants. and also making them eventually public the way normal warrants usually are. I would love to see my bill passed, but assuming that it, is something that needs to be carefully, negotiated and considered and amended, we could take a smaller step and just ensure that there's transparency into the use of this type of surveillance technology. So,
Thank you. And to that point, again, when you were testifying on your bill, a couple things that I wrote down, and it's probably just on the heels of the Fusion Center report that we just heard, but knowing the number of reverse warrants that were issued and the number of arrests or convictions that resulted from those reverse warrants. If it really is the needle in the ever increasingly large haystack, then let's find out.
did somebody go?
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It looks like the next item on the agenda is AI and court records. And so we'll go ahead and have Mr. Ealing come to the table. Oh,
I think the order is going to be
Oh.
Joel, Randy, and Harvey, and then Matt. They didn't
Oh,
make it onto
okay.
the agenda for some reason.
oh, okay.
Sorry.
So Joel is first, and then we'll let our co-chair take back over the gavel.
You can introduce yourself and proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, or Madam Chairs and members. I'm Joel Carlson. I own a legal research and government affairs business here in St. Paul, and I have represented the Minnesota Association of Verbatim Captioners and Reporters since 2002. They are a professional association of official court reporters, CART reporters that do things like what you see up on your screen here, only that one is artificial intelligence that you're watching on the screen right there. And as you watch, you're going to see a lot of mistakes. And they also are freelance court reporters that do depositions in civil trials. And so that's what our association is made up of. And we have brought to the courts, and we wanted to bring your attention to an issue related to human oversight on the preparation of official court transcripts. And we think that this is an issue where you want an official record that is overseen by a human that is taking down the record. A tape recorder or an AI transcript can't pause you and say, "I didn't get that. What did you say?" And those are very important things when your civil and constitutional rights are on the line. Randy Ann Harvey, who's with me, who's an official court reporter in Kanabec County, is going to talk a little bit about the issue. And we appreciate you at least putting this on the radar. We need to work with our justice partners to make sure that this is done right and correct. That's why we brought it to the Judicial Council. And so this is a work in progress, but it is an important and critical issue, particularly when you're looking at things like appeals of your case. All you get is that official record to the Court of Appeals. They don't take live testimony. And so you want to make sure that you have an official record that is overseen by a person, a human that verifies that that's what is actually done and said in court. So with that, Madam Chair, I'd turn it over to Randy Ann.
Thank you so much. You can introduce yourself and proceed.
Hi, I'm Randy Ann Harvey. I've been a stenographic court reporter for over 34 years, and I currently work, as Joel said, in the 10th Judicial District in Kanabec County. I'm a past president of Maverick, that's our state association, and I'm currently serving as a director on the board of the National Court Reporters Association. Both Maverick and NCRA, as well as court reporting associations across the country, are concerned with the unregulated use in courts of AI-assisted ASR, which is automatic speech recognition, in the creation of the verbatim court record, which is the written transcript. The Minnesota Judicial Branch has developed an AI policy number 704 in November of 2024, which is 7 dog years and 20 or 50 AI years, that says it will develop policies that are based on responsible, equitable, traceable, reliable, and governable principles. But that is the extent of the policy it will develop. Therefore, that some guardrails need to be put in place to prevent unregulated and unaccountable use of AI-assisted ASR in the development of court hearing transcripts, and to protect individuals' access to justice, which includes complete and accurate preservation of their proceedings. Currently, the judicial branch is made up of approximately half steno court reporters and half electronic reporters who use digital audio to make a record. Even though Minnesota Statute 484.74 addresses what hearings should be stenographically reported and which ones should be electronically recorded, the judicial branch employs electronic reporters for all types of hearings. The concern is that, especially in the case of only electronically, digitally audio hearings, when a party requests a transcript, that audio file is uploaded into an unregulated generative AI large language model or outsourced to who knows where to produce the written transcript. Issues with that process would include sharing court hearing information to unknown entities, sharing parties' private information, and voice biometrics without consent. This could put many parties at risk, and it jeopardizes justice. Our proposal of the human oversight and creation of official verbatim court records strikes a balance between leveraging AI technology and preserving the accuracy of court records through human oversight. It ensures Minnesota courts maintain trust and reliability in their proceedings and protects the substantive rights of the citizens of Minnesota to justice. Thank you on behalf of the Stenographic Court Reporters of Minnesota.
We have, I think we'll go through all our testifiers before we do questions. So I think Mr. Ealing, did you want to testify? Thank you. You can stay like back there maybe, and then we can ask questions. Thank you. You can introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt Ealing, in this case, on behalf of Minnesotans for Open Government. We appreciate the committee's attention to this matter. Regulating governmental use of artificial intelligence is something we've certainly advocated for over the past several years. We're pleased to see the introduction of model legislation on court reporting requirements that includes certification and oversight language for AI-assisted content generation. And as you'll see from our written submissions, we have suggested for discussion purposes similar concepts in regard to materials filed by attorneys. We believe that to the extent that artificial intelligence is used by the government, including by attorneys performing governmental work, labeling and related requirements will become increasingly important so that the public can understand the genesis of government work product and tie that work product to responsible parties. Because we operate in a legal and governmental system in which the attestation of individuals acting on behalf of the government has long been required, we would like to make sure that preserves itself into the digital era that we're walking into. So I'd be happy to take any questions. We are certainly happy to have discussions with the judicial branch and other parties who are interested in this matter as well.
Thank you so much. Members, is there any questions? Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the testifiers. What an interesting concept to contemplate, because when we're dealing with the judicial system, and I'm not thinking just that one aspect, but I'm thinking more broadly now, we are, the judicial system is putting people's life and liberty in the balance. And so that entire continuum of the process, I think we have to ask a similar question. Where is it appropriate to have human oversight so it's not just this one aspect of what was being discussed here, but more broadly? I'm thinking recently, wasn't it a month or two ago where there was police reports being generated by AI or something like that? And so, again, just think on the entire continuum. A very important conversation because, again, errors can be made and it impacts people's lives significantly. At the same time, AI is a evolving and maturing technology, and so the day is going to, because human error is also a very real thing in multiple aspects of life. So because AI is evolving, the day will come when more trust is put into AI than it is into humans, and then we're going to have a similar conversation. And I don't know how many years out that date obviously is going to be, but this is an important conversation. So I appreciate both being brought forward as we contemplate this, and then more broadly, other aspects of touching the judicial process, but not just the judicial process. It's can be more broadly into government, where it touches people's lives, and how much are we going to over rely on AI, and where it would have been appropriate for humans, but then in a few years from now, it's going to be, I don't trust the human touch there. I would be more, I would have more confidence will be the conversation if AI was managing the process. So again, very important, so thank you.
Any other member discussion? Yep, Senator Limmer.
Just a brief note. I listened carefully to Senator Lucero. The prospect of humanity relying more on AI records, I was told by certain prosecutors in the state of Minnesota that sometimes they cannot get a prosecution because the jury did not see a video of the crime. And we're already there. We're to the point that since we see so many videos represented, whether it's crime or whether it's other subjects, we're getting to the point where we don't believe the accusation of a criminal activity if it doesn't have a video record of it. And so I think Senator Lucero is really making a good point that there may come a time that if it's not registered via AI, the perception will be that it's not true. And I think we have to be very careful and talk about this eventual or potential reality often to prepare the next generation of legislators or whether it's jurors or whether it's anyone to understand that. So good point, Senator Lucero.
Any other comments? Yeah, well, thank you again for coming and sharing this testimony. I think it was a really good conversation. It sounds like more conversations need to be had with the judicial branch as we move forward on this, but definitely an important issue for us to be discussing today, so thank you. So we're moving on to our last agenda item. I love how talkative we all were. Like, this was a really good hearing, and it took longer than I thought it would. So I apologize to our last testifiers that we won't have as much time as I had thought. But the final subject that we have today is just discussion for future topics for the commission to consider. And Dr. Newman is first on our list of testifiers. If you'd like to come up, you can introduce yourself and proceed. And if you could keep your comments to like 2 or 3 minutes, if that's all right. I apologize. I wasn't thinking we'd have any time constraints, or I would have told you earlier. But thank you. You can continue or proceed.
Chair, co-chair, and members of the commission, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Dr. B.B. Newman. I am a St. Anthony Village resident. I'm here to suggest future topics for the commission's consideration concerning the practical enforcement of the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. I want to begin with a simple observation. Over multiple years, specifically in 2006, 2016, again in 2021, and most recently, I submitted formal public data requests under the Act. In each instance, I did not receive what I requested. While the surrounding circumstances varied, the outcome remained consistent. That repetition is what brings me here today. When the same result occurs across years and administrations, it suggests a structural condition rather than an isolated error. The question for the commission is whether statutory access rights are reliably translating into functional access in practice. In my experience, and in the experiences shared by many residents, common features include delayed responses, rolling productions without defined completion points, assertions that requests are closed without clear statutory grounding, and limited transparency regarding record retention or destruction. These are not individual disputes. There are signals about how the system operates. Advisory opinions issued by the Department of Administration provide important statutory interpretation, but interpretation alone does not ensure remediation. A future topic for the Commission may be whether the Act's reliance on advisory guidance without a corresponding corrective pathway leaves noncompliance unresolved even when the law is clear. This question becomes more consequential as government data systems grow more complex. Automated record systems, AI-assisted tools, and interagency data sharing increasingly determine what data exists, how it is classified, and whether it remains accessible over time. Oversight frameworks designed for static records may not fully address these dynamics. In reviewing public records frameworks nationally, one sees that many jurisdictions separate interpretation from enforcement through mechanisms such as corrective deadlines, administrative orders, audits, or judicial remedies. Minnesota has made a different design choice, and the Commission may wish to examine whether that choice contributes to recurring access failures over time. Finally, the Commission may wish to consider whether the Act provides residents with a meaningful remedy short of litigation. When enforcement depends primarily on court action, access to public data risks becoming uneven and resource dependent. I offer these observations as future topics for study, not as allegations. The durability of Minnesota's transparency framework depends not only on what the law says, but on whether it works predictably for residents over time. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Our next testifier is Pepper Woodworth. If you would like to come up to the table in front, you can introduce yourself and proceed. Yes, Senator Limmer.
Madam Chair, I couldn't find any written testimony of Dr. Newman, and I was hoping that perhaps she could allow us to have copies of her written testimony.
It sounds like it is in
It is?
the materials.
Oh.
Or it should be, and if not, we can definitely, we can definitely, oh yeah, okay,
Okay.
cool. So we do have it, yep. Sure. Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay. So you can introduce yourself and proceed. And like I mentioned, we're running a little bit shorter on time than I thought. So about 2 to 3 minutes, please. Thank you.
My name is Pepper Woodworth. I come here today. I'm extremely grateful that I finally have a voice and that all of the families that I'm up here representing do as well. I am an advocate for parents who have lost their children to CPS. I've heard you talk on the clock running out on trying to get different data for stuff, and CPS is the absolute worst when it comes to having any kind of data practice. 15 years ago, I lost my children. I didn't know then what I know now when it comes to being able to access that data. I have had numerous families in the Wadena, Todd, and Ottertail County areas who have done the data request, and they absolutely do not get it. I have personally done my own. I'm still basically living under the oversight of Minnesota CPS because I'm being refused my data. I'm being denied the God-given right to defend myself. I can't repair the relationship with my daughter Families are losing their children because they don't have a voice. There are no data spreadsheets on what happens to a kid who comes out of foster care. You look up those statistics and you get the final, or those numbers aren't available or accurate. Okay? Parents don't get the medical records. Okay? Your parental rights, you should have that data, right? When parents are being denied that, being locked out of their kids' charts, not being able to access the data. That picture right there is my 19-year-old daughter. That little urn right there is also my 19-year-old daughter. If you look up what happens to foster kids, to kids who have been adopted out, the higher rate of addiction, suicide, mental health disorders. But again, there's no specific data on that. There's also no specific data on the kids that end up dying in foster care or the ones who are abused. Where's the data on the social workers being held accountable for the ones who haven't been removed from their housing or from the homes? Do you guys know that social workers don't need to have a license in Minnesota to come steal your children? And because they don't, no data is held and they are not held accountable to anyone. You guys are the first people that I have been able to get to even remotely listen to what we're saying. There's no place in Minnesota that takes reports. There's no place that you can call where judges are held accountable. You have entire counties that are working against you. Social workers work together, guardian ad litems, county appointed attorneys. But there's no data to show how any of them are doing with their cases. How many kids get put back home? How many parents commit suicide because they've lost their children? How many teenagers? How many teenagers commit suicide because the state thought they knew what was better for them than their parents? I'm not saying that all CPS workers are bad, not even saying that. What I am saying is that the state of Minnesota takes way too much. They take your money, they take your children, and who is held accountable? I sit before you today asking and begging that you guys start to audit these people, because I find that in 2023, 68% of the children adopted out in Minnesota were autistic. Now, I don't know about you guys, but that math isn't mathing. My daughter is one of those statistics that aren't recorded. My son is so stuck in addiction with serious mental health problems. He's one of the statistics that aren't held. They're not counted. Kids who are adopted out, higher risk for addiction, higher risk for suicide, higher risk becoming criminals. When are we going to start really looking at what's important for these kids? Where are the studies on what happens to a child's brain when they're removed from their home? What happens to a 3-year-old who is removed from her parents but put in 9 different foster homes? Do you know what the mental health and the DSM says about that? 9 foster homes
I'm so
at
sorry,
3.
we're going to have to ask you to just conclude your comments, and I know that one of my colleagues has a question for you.
Okay.
So, did you want to sum things up?
I just want to know where the data is. I want to know why we have to have so many problems to try and get data that we should have accessible to us. We shouldn't have to be charged.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so sorry for everything that you and your family have been through, and we appreciate you coming and sharing these insights and suggestions. And I know that Senator Lucero had a question for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it was along those same lines. I think much of the testimony might have been outside the scope of this commission, but in my 12 years in the legislature, I have spoken to many parents in situations similar to yours, or other situations not directly but yours, but involving parental custody. And a couple of years ago, I remember Chair Scott held a hearing in Civil Law Committee in the House on father's rights or something like that, presumptive custody or something like that. And there's just a lot of different. So I thank you for coming down here and the courage and to share your voice and what you've been going through. I've never been a member in my 12 years of any of the Human Services Committees. I think what you're describing might be more jurisdiction of that.
I've heard.
But you bring up some really good points, and I think it's definitely something that if data isn't being generated now, a bill or legislation might be needed that would likely have jurisdiction in those committees to require data to be generated in these various areas. So again, thank you very much.
I have one question though.
Yes, Ms. Woodworth, yeah.
One question. So who do you report when there's nobody to report to? Who do you report them to? Who? Because I have family losing their children, and their time and their clock is ticking. Their time is running out. I have proof, I have recordings, but none of you will listen.
Well, we're listening now, and we appreciate you coming to us. I think I have a couple of ideas of people that I could connect you with. We created an ombudsperson for foster care in Minnesota. I think they would be a really good resource. And then I have one other idea for a colleague of mine in the House who works on these issues. So we're kind of the data nerds. So it's like it intersects with our purview here, but I think the human services experts would be your best allies. So if you will follow up with me, I will make some introductions.
Okay.
Thank you for being here.
And Madam Chair,
Senator Lucero, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. And that's what I was going to suggest. We very much are listening, and we appreciate your remarks. And it's not easy coming down here. I know that that's time consuming and can be scary. So thank you for that. And yeah, there are legislators that are very receptive and would like to take your ideas, create legislation, and that I think would be very receptive. So thank you.
I would just like somebody to look at the proof I have, and I promise you, every single one of you would not believe it. But thank you.
Thank you for being here. Yeah, thank you. We've been given permission to go like 3 more minutes. Mr. Heller, if you wanted your 2 minutes, if it relates to our committee, I know it looks like Mr. Neumeister also, did you have some testimony for future? So it looks like, let's do 2 minutes and 2 minutes, and then we'll wrap things up. So, Mr. Neumeister?
Madam Chair, for the record, my name is Rich Neumeister. Over the last several months, the committee has heard many, many things. Some things, of course, I strongly disagree with, like charging for inspection, for public data, or to, let's put barriers like burdensome requests or things like that. Because the state of Minnesota has the flexibility of the law to handle some of those things. And also, as you may know, historically, government entities have had to have, when they build systems, they have to have access, for convenient use. They have to build the system. Don't build the system and say, oh, we can't give the access. So there's a lot of panoply of issues out there. So how can you at least get your arms starting around for enforcement and compliance? And that's with DPO, the Data Practices Office. You spend $500,000 every year on DPO, on 6 staff, 5 staff, who deal with opinions, all kinds of things. So let's, as your next topic, over the interim for the funding year, next year, maybe have a commission, maybe have a board, maybe have using that dynamic into an independent board, commission, whatever. Many states have done it. There have been attempts in the legislature to do it 3 or 4 times. The last time was in 1999 when it lost in a subcommittee by a 3-2 vote. So, Madam Chair, that's where I think you can get a lot of interaction and a lot of plays if you take the topic like enforcement, whatever, and then take a look at one of the current ways is DPO and maybe the OAH, but the DPO is the important thing because that's where the money is, at least where you can start on something. So, Madam Chair, and that's where the evaluation is, and you get comments from people and all that. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for the suggestions. And it looks like we have one more testifier, Mr. Heller.
And Madam Chair, while he's coming
Oh,
up.
yeah, sorry, Senator Limmer.
Thank you.
Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So kind of off the wall topic. I have to go, so I wanted to get this on here. But I think the time has come for both bodies of the legislature to have a full-fledged, all-out IT or technology committee, not the Data Practices Commission solely or the Cybersecurity Commission, but to have it all out. So I over the interim here, I had my legislative assistant reach out to NCSL and others to try to, not wanting to recreate the wheel, but what are some of the other states that have these full-fledged committees, and to get the jurisdiction and et cetera, et cetera. And so just throwing it out there, maybe that's a topic here that we could discuss in 15-ish minutes or half hour and maybe come up with some recommendations of trying to appeal to our leaders in both bodies and both caucus to have something like that. Because again, these issues, they're impacting every facet, whether it be K through 12, human services, transportation, judiciary, et cetera. And we need to have these conversations among a dedicated committee. So just throwing it out there, I think this commission maybe could endorse something or, so, cool.
Thank you. I like it.
Yeah, just to that point, I did ask House Research to do a little look-see across the nation to see what other states have. So I have that information. I can forward you that email. But I've already told my leadership team, like, that's come next year after the next election. That's something I'm going to be really wanting to happen. Talk to Chair Nash as well. He's very supportive. So I think that's something we can get bipartisan support on.
And be a member of the public who's like, do it. So, Mr. Heller, if you'd like to introduce yourself, you have 2 minutes.
Yes, as long as you don't include my introduction for the Pacific subject I'll be doing. My name is Rick Heller. I'm a white male, about 6 foot, wearing red suspenders. I'm white, and I unofficially represent twice exceptional Minnesota statute. Unofficially again, 120B15 under gifted and talented programming. Also, there's a bill that may help, 3311 Senate file. I believe Hudson is for having it this year, champion. Also, I unofficially represent the people with print disabilities found in voting law 203B29 subdivision 2, however not defined in education. You also find Senate filed for this year 1703 regarding that. So I come to testify today at the Legislative Commission Data Practice. I've been probably coming since 2015. I appreciate this opportunity to speak on specific general discussions for future topics. One document I forwarded to this committee yesterday included an attachment from the LCC, which is their document. I was denied it because it wasn't relevant, but it is about transparency. I'd ask you reconsider in posting that. Transparency is important internally. It's a 6-page letter of certain things I can and can't do. I think it's relevant to public engagement at the Capitol. If not, then I'd ask that at least send it to the senators. Form mail does not allow portable document formats. At least send it to the members. But I feel like it's been isolated. However, that's the way it is right now. According to Jim Melby, the senior analyst for the LCC, spoke about this. The chair said no, and also their counsel or their lawyers said no, not to post because it wasn't relevant.
but I assure you it is about transparency, and you reconsider that. Now, as far as AI, nationally, AI has not been standardized. So you're talking a lot about AI, but it ain't standardized. That's something that's very relevant. President Obama did admit that they're collecting all data on everyone. So you can certainly check into that. So how that plays a role with your bill. It is about safety and security of the public. That's what Mr. Obama said. And we all know about the phone pinging and how that's working out for third parties that they can do that. And
Thank you so much, Mr. Heller. I'm so sorry, we have to wrap it up. We're over time. But thank you for showing up, for sharing your thoughts. We can make sure that letter goes to the committee members. Yeah, thank you for being here today. And with that, we'll conclude our business. So thank you so much.
I was hoping to say one thing, but I guess not.